Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Leading with Technology Interactive Q&A session. I'm Sandeep, Senior Lecturer in Information Systems and Technology Management at UNSW Business School, standing in for Associate Professor Sam Kirshner, your academic lead for this year's Learn to Lead, Leading the Future. I'm here with Travis Rice, who will be answering all of your questions on Leading with Tech. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Camregals of the Eora Nation that are the traditional custodians of the land which I'm speaking to you from today in my home in Manly Vale. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we meet on wherever we may be across the country and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Today's interactive Q&A session is an opportunity for us to delve a little deeper into the topic of leading digital transformation and for you to ask why in questions you may have on this module. But before we get started today, a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you to those of you who have already submitted questions. I have handpicked the most popular question themes that I feel you will all benefit from, and Travis will answer those first. After this, we will move on to real-time questions. You can post questions throughout the session using the Q&A function, and we will endeavor to answer as many questions as possible in the time that we have today. This webinar will be recorded and posted to the Learn to Lead Navigator platform following the session. So Travis, first a question from me. What potential changes do you envision for the world in the next 10 years as a result of AR, MR technology? And how might these advancements reshape the concept of leadership and the required skills?
I'm glad you're starting with like a really easy, small, and straightforward question, Sandeep. So thanks for that. It's I have no idea, but I'm gonna jump in there and make some speculations.
Sure.
But I feel like AR, MR, XR technologies are kind of right at this cusp, launching off towards something that is potentially useful. We haven't seen a great implementation of these uses in the real world. There's a lot of games, a lot of edge cases. Horizon Worlds is one of those. There's a VR chat and aspects of that, but the real grounded use cases are they're very piecemeal and they're not holistic. So I think in the next, in the near future, hopefully, one of these larger platforms is going to establish a dominance that will allow us to have something that we can then work in and be active in in a regular way. I think that idea of a work in this context is really relevant because a lot of the technologies we use to work. A lot of them, we find a way to put it into our social processes of gaining income or working with other people through communication. So I think that's a critical nexus that we have to cross, and we're not there yet. So that's a hopeful, yeah. One of the things I talked about in the talk, I'm sorry, I don't want to go on too long on this question, but is that the ideas of AI and generative AI and how those are going to lead on into this. I think that we're just starting to see that huge acceleration that is picking up, and once we see that go into more broadly into digital spaces and 3D rendered 3D model spaces, I think it's going to be significant, and I think that is going to be a great accelerator again on top of that.
Travis, you alluded to work in your response to my question earlier. I'm also wondering about life and as humans, how we create shared meanings, engage with shared experiences. And from your talk, I realized that with the increasing preponderance of generative AI, and us moving towards more personalized experiences, what is to become of human culture in general? If we lose out on creating shared experiences, having a chat over a movie that we watched over the weekend, if you have not watched the same movie, so how is that going to play out into the future?
I think that's a great question. And I think that idea, if we do have a personalized experience, we're going to get a much more resonant echo chamber that social media already feeds back to us. And those things that we have, or like what may be inherent biases that we have and we search for, or particular interests, we're going to get further funneled. And so that's a huge risk. But I will say on the side of it, on the social side, and I think this, you're totally right. We go to the movies together generally. I mean, it's nice to go to the movie by yourself, but we go to the movies together, and the experience of seeing something is as a group and as an audience, going to go see a band, you experience that completely different when you're with a group, and that energy that comes. So I really think that there's a couple of things that tie into that. And one of those is this idea, I spoke about it briefly in the talk, but I'd like to talk about it more in detail, which is the idea of being told a story, and the way that is part of our nature. And that's it's very natural for us to listen. And it's very natural for us to, want to hear passive stories, versus the challenge and like the intellectual bridge that you have to go across to engage with actual content. And I think that's something that we don't culturally have. I think that gaming and the youth of today, that idea of gaming culture is starting to make that much more of an acceptable idea, and something that people are happier to cross that bridge.
Right. Hopefully, these new technologies will enhance the culture that we already have, and not lead us down to a dystopian future. Travis, thanks for that great response. Would love to chat with you more about this offline. Let's move on to some of the pre-submitted questions that I picked from the platform. My first question, Travis, is from Anne Ulstad, who's an AGSM alumni from Switzerland. And the question is, do you have any perspectives or speculations as to what it will mean for our society that technology advancement is too fast for human being psychology to keep up with the changes that the technology drives?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a real thing that we're all looking at and dealing with at this moment, which is, technology is progressing much faster than litigation. It's progressing much faster than social norms. We don't, like as a university, and as an educational community, even as a tech community, the questions of how and where to use ChatGPT is very gray. And in that, people don't really, I don't think many people would want to say, yeah, I used it, whereas a lot of people would be very tempted to, and probably are, which is, there's appropriate situations for it. But I think that idea is we're defining it, and we're defining it now. But part of that, and I think about those same things. How do we keep up with what's happening with mixed reality, augmented reality, large language models, all of these different subsets of technologies. And these are just the ones that we happen to talk about on this talk. There's many more, but I think what we're starting to see, and this is just my opinion again, is that we're moving into this era of the curatorial mind, which is how do we curate the systems and curate the technologies that we have around us to bridge towards those outcomes that we're wanting. In some of your work, looking at large bits of data, how do we funnel those things towards the answers that we actually want to have?
Yeah, how do we make it more fit for purpose? Yeah, certainly, Travis. Thanks for that. I'll move on to the next question from Benson Cheung, who's a science alum from Hong Kong. So Benson asks, how does the average person keep up with all the advances in a reasonable way? Trustworthy news sources seem to be at a premium, and a lot of immersive research is needed to understand a lot of the new technologies at play today.
Yeah, I have a particular interest in this, so I kind of do a deep dive on these things. But I mean, for the average person, I think it's really, I have a hard time answering that one, Benson. I think it's a great question, but I think that for me, finding those hooks that propel me down a path usually open up other paths for research and concepts on these things. So I think that the answers that we have, the answers that that we're looking to for, I broad sets of technology, and we want to know how to keep up with it. It's again, it's coming on with that that curatorial view of how do we look at many different things and just take those pieces that relate to us and tie it back into something.
Interesting, Travis. Yeah, thanks. Let's now move on to the final question from the platform that I've selected. So this is from George Miltiadis, who's an engineering alum from Sydney. Great topic and interesting path for our future. He's referring to the module. Progress will be based on the level of capital invested. Where is the money to develop these solutions coming from now and in the future?
That's a good question, George. I think that just in the big picture, I'll talk a little bit about the UNSW focus, which the money that moves around within the campus, I'm not sure about that, but I will say that the concepts that are much larger than just what we're dealing with at the UNSW spaces are really there's a huge amount of interest in this question. There's a lot of speculative funding. There's a lot of very large companies that are diving in on this. And I'm not sure if I can answer that question, George, without going into the specifics, or knowing a little bit more detail on that. But I think that my experience working as an entrepreneur in the startup field, I've seen very large amounts of funding thrown towards very niche, very edge ideas, and that funding, obviously stirs new industries up, and those things, they start and fail all the time, all around us. With something like the things that we're talking about, Meta, Apple, Google, the investment they're doing in scooping up smaller companies and tech companies, not just for their patents, but also for their staff, is a very interesting area to watch, definitely.
Okay. Thanks, Travis. Yeah, there is a lot of money being thrown at these technologies, clearly. Hopefully it'll have some good outcomes for humanity at the end of the day. Travis, I mean, I was watching your modules, and one thing that struck me was the point that you noted about convergence of technologies. Now, in the past, we've saw technologies performing a singular function, and now everything is sort of converged into a mobile phone, especially the everyday things that we do. And you are sort of you spoke about the divergence that's coming up. Even in this relatively converged environment that we are living in today, but there is still a divergence in terms of the different apps that we go to and the physical and digital spaces in which these tasks are accomplished. If I could push you further and get you to think about what would be the next level of convergence and divergence, what would be the next leap, and how might that look like if we are to imagine the future today?
I think that's a great question, and I mean, it's one of the things that we're actively looking at, not with my work at the university, but with some of the teams that I work with outside of the university, is that idea of how these different AI tools are starting to push really hard on a convergent model, and a model that is able to direct as a first layer, direct a certain concept of thinking. Sorry, just one second. But I do feel like with convergence, at this point, we get to see multiple layers of it. One of the things we all saw, the big announcement of Apple's augmented reality headset. That was huge news this week. That kind of briefly eclipsed what's happening with AI, which has been, the big news for the last 6 months. But the convergence around those two pieces of technology, particularly Apple's being a headset that utilizes the whole of the iOS operating system within a new model. It's asking new questions for us, and it's asking new ways of looking at those types of technologies.
Wow, yeah, that'll be interesting development to follow. Hopefully, it'll happen. I'm sure it'll happen in the next 5 to 10 years. If you're not, if you have been optimistic. Great. So I think we've sort of come to the end of the pre-selected questions. Now we can now move on to the live Q&A. We've been receiving quite a few questions via the Q&A functionality, Travis. I'll maybe pick a few, and we get a chance to discuss them. So this is from go on, Travis.
I was just going to say, Sandeep, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the convergence question, just because I think it's a great question, and I think that there's, looking at the way technologies tend to, expand and contract based on markets and based on consumer demand, and the concepts of simplification of big ideas. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, all that I could think of when I was watching your video, and this sort of struck me, and I was thinking, well, this will be then one of the next episodes on which is that UK production house that comes up with was it Black
Mirror? Yeah.
Black Mirror, yeah. So I was just imagining, okay, what would it look like, if it was featured on Black Mirror, what would this next convergence be talking about? Now, honestly, I haven't really thought much about it, and I thought I'd pick your brains before I sort of delve deeper into that. But yeah, it's exciting, and also equally, it can be disturbing if that is leading us to a dystopian.
I have to say,
with all these,
I completely share your optimistic view rather than a pessimistic view, because that idea of, it's a very Silicon Valley model of mentality, right, which is to say, we build the world that we want to live in, which is, I completely agree with the concept of that, which is, that if we want positive outcomes, we work towards positive outcomes, and right, it's something that we have to actively participate in. These social functions of finding regulation edges and finding use cases for something that's only got a particular set of uses. So yeah, that's awesome.
Mm. Yeah, well, I'll be thinking about this for over the weekend for sure.
Yeah, I feel like now's the time to go and watch Black Mirror.
I know. I hope they're coming out with the next season soon. Right. So let's move to the live Q&A question. So this question is from Graham. Graham asks an interesting question. Do you think a long-term issue with generative AI is that we will get lost in those worlds for entertainment purposes? In other words, will we amuse ourselves to death? Paraphrasing Neil Postman and Roger Waters.
I think this is a great Black Mirror question. I think Graham has hit the nail on the head. I do think that there's a level of social. We're looking at a world that has more content generated than any other moment. It's incredible amount of content that gets pushed onto these streaming channels, onto YouTube, etc., onto Zoom in this exact situation. But this content is again, it's primarily focused on this idea of passive. And so I think that if we do continue further down into these worlds, into this generative world, I think that the ideas around generative AI right now at least afford us that ability to ask that question of how do we engage with it, and asking us to be an agent at least. So for now, if it's like my example in the talk was talking about the Seinfeld, that's working with that particular set. But if we did run particular sets of looking at a specific lecturer's notes, 10 years of notes on environmental modeling for the Mississippi Delta, for example, and the amount of information we could glean that's delivered and could be delivered in an educational context, we'd be able to dive quite deep into that. And yeah, I think before we die of entertainment overdose, hopefully we'll get somewhere socially and yeah, socially before we go to any other planets. Yeah,
absolutely. Next question is from Ryan Travis, and Ryan poses a very interesting question. So post-COVID, there's been a push towards getting employees back into the office by a lot of businesses. How do you think mixed reality technology will affect sentiment around remote working?
Great question. A lot of the work that I do at the university hinges on video conferencing. We talk a lot about hybrid technologies, using video and audio to bridge the gap between people. And conceptually, I mean, this is a good way for Sandeep and I to talk to a huge amount of people, but it's not the same, and it's just not the same as being in person. And I think that every promise of technology, whether it's a cell phone call or a Zoom call or a mixed reality device, it's trying to bridge it a little bit closer. And so I think right now we've seen some versions of Google's got a fantastic device, which is kind of a large format television you can sit in front of, and it can do a 3-dimensional model that it can track you, and you can live and move around within it, and you can see depth in it. So it's kind of a digital screen hologram. That one gets the air quotes. But I think that the use case of it isn't quite there. I would love to see what it would look like, and I'd love to see that model. We're talking with Meta, we're talking with Google, we're talking with Microsoft about how we can use these technologies to bridge this gap. But it's I haven't seen a great answer there yet.
Thanks, Travis. Dave asked a question that I also sort of worry about every now and then. So he's interested about how we leverage these advances, that is AI, MR, VR, without becoming so dependent that when something fails, the underlying skills that are not there to fall back on. For example, sites self-driving car failure or remote maintenance using MR in space. So are we losing skills? Is that skill erosion, or are we sort of building up the base capabilities and moving on to the next level? What's going on?
I mean, socially, this isn't really my area of expertise, but I'm happy to speculate on it. Yeah. But I think socially, there's there are those concepts that get pushed to the back burner. I know a lot of people that can program code, that are fantastic programmers in certain languages, but if you're asking them to understand the core mechanics of what they're writing, they're not able to. And that's kind of one side. The other side is tons of people drive a car, but don't know how to change the oil in their car. So I think that every evolution of technology is it has that risk, and we either accept that risk or we choose to educate ourselves down that path. But again, these are my ideas, which are not not broadly agreed with. So yeah. But it does feel like we're going down into a Black Mirror dystopian world right now, which I really absolutely don't think that we are personally, even though it is the middle of winter.
Right. Yeah. The next question is around education and the use of such technologies such as VR, AR, and mixed reality. And this is something that you briefly touch upon in one of your videos as well, Travis, on VR education. So, what's been done in the space of educating people to use these technologies to their full potential, and what do we make about more specifically about people who are not digital natives, the older generation who these are certainly opportunities for them to feel more connected, more closer to individuals and persons and their immediate communities. But what can we do to help them be more educated about the use of these technologies?
I think that's another good question. I think the ideas that I'm seeing in education tend to focus on a particular vertical use case. In like fire emergency fire training, or a particular model of a heart or something. Those use cases, they're fantastic and they're great and they work really well in that particular aspect. The things that we're hoping to see and the things that we're working towards are really the unified version of what that looks like. And then whenever I talk about a unified version in this context, what I'm talking about is a way that a person, and again, I'm going to go very big picture here and talk about ideas that don't exist, ideas for things that don't exist. But it's that idea that a person, sitting in the Sydney CBD, which is where I happen to be, and talking to someone in Kensington campus, that I could bridge that space digitally and virtually and through augmented tools. But the way that I could do it would allow me to come over and say, like Sandeep and I could meet in a space that's existing in like, say, for example, the CBD campus, UNSW's campus in the center of the city. If we had a way that we could go and visit that space and then stay within the immersive environment, where we could, together look at a heart model and then together go and do a fire simulation training, that is a unified space. And I mean, I'm hesitant to use this word, but I think in this context, I'm going to use it, which is the metaverse. That's that idea that we would have something that we could join as a space, and then we could have multiple different experiences that are not verticals. For that growth to happen, I think is really critical, and that becomes that operating system level look whenever you're looking at something like an immersive piece of hardware. The other thing about the use case with people who may not be digital natives, I think it's it's a question of where does it fit into your life, and where's the use for it practically. I will say, and I know, Sandeep, I know you've got a Quest headset at your place, and I know I have one here. This enables some of the work that we're working towards and some of the concepts that we have. But for most people, a VR headset isn't really useful right now. Maybe it will be different in a year, but right now it's very much in the entertainment field and very much in the particular, if you have a very niche vertical that has a particular use for it, like the ones that I gave as an example. Yeah.
Yeah, the only use that I found for my VR headset is watching Netflix lying on my bed. So I hope to move it to make it a more productive tool, but that's what it is.
I totally hear you. I mean, it's great for that, and that idea of an immersive screen, to have a giant screen. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Jesse has a related question, and this is something that we briefly covered in a previous Q&A. And this is on how do you change people's attitudes, especially in big organizations. So Jessie works in the property tech sector, and she sees the value that AR, AI, VR can bring to this sector. But how do you convince the decision makers? How do you get rid of old systems and work habits? How do you change work routines and empower people? So have you, Travis, have you had any experience in dealing such issues, or if you could comment on this conceptually?
I think that's great, because I mean, one of the things, like, I've been working in the VR AR field for almost 10 years, and so I'm no old hat, but I've been around for a little while. And one of the original promises of VR technology, and before we talked about AR and MR and things like that, was particularly around property sales and doing remote viewing of properties. And so that was heralded as a great way for overseas investment to see the 360 video and those types of things. I do think that that there's some people doing interesting things in that field, and there's great 3D scans that have happened, but I think it's not, at least for my case, and I again, that's not my field. That I think that it's primarily the users that are not picking it up, but it may be, if it's happening on an organizational side. I've had a lot of great feedback around talking about concepts that I'm working towards for things exactly like what we're talking about. Getting on a talk like this and being able to talk towards goals, towards shared visions. That exact idea is what I mentioned in my talk, which is what science fiction is. Science fiction leads us towards a social shared goal. I don't know, I'm sure that you read it or possibly read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe.
There's also a question related to that. So
oh, is there? Oh, great. I think
is there any progress on developing a Babel, was the question.
Is there any, what's that?
Is there any progress on developing a Babel?
Yeah, that's interesting. So that I think it was called a Babelfish. Babelfish.
Babelfish, yeah.
It was like it was a fish, like it was an alien idea that you put a fish into your ear, and it translates everything you hear into something you can understand. There are versions of that work with. There's one that went on the market a couple of years ago that's selling a kind of a language tool that looks kind of like an earpod, like an AirPod. But I haven't seen something that's quite gone down that path and been useful yet. But one of the things that I have heard recently pitched, and I'm fine to talk about this. I can talk about this. It's someone pitched a concept that I thought was really interesting, and it was that idea of having an AI kind of a listener that would be able, like, if you had an AirPod in your ear and it has an AI language model running on it, you're able to listen and feed you concepts based on your surroundings, or what's in the room with you, or your next meeting is in 15 minutes. You should probably start walking right about now. And don't forget, Sandeep's got a child, and don't forget, like all of these different things that you could feed into it. And so that idea, I think, is probably very close. The person who pitched that to me, I thought it was a great idea, and I think it's very close.
Great. Hope that comes to life very soon, Travis.
Did we bridge too many ideas there talking about Hitchhiker's Guide?
Oh, just one. Travis, the next question is something, again, that you alluded to in the last part of your video series, and this question is from Buddhadev Chug. The question goes as such: you raised it as You raised it, and this has been raised by others. And ethics, boundaries, and even legislation need to be brought in to contain misuse and uncontrolled creep. How much time do we have to do so before it becomes too late?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I have no idea, but the ideas around I mean the legislation around that is, I mean, how long did we have Airbnb before there was a rule around that? And
Yeah.
you know, how long did we have Uber before that was you know, it's that as far as I know, I don't even know if there's a rule around the bike sharing models that are in place. I think it could be a while, but I think everybody sees the need for it. Obviously, in the States, there's a very big push, you know, with the Supreme Court, or sorry, with the US justice system is asking these questions of AI models, and the people running them at this point, they're saying something needs to happen and the guardrails need to be put in place. Right now, the Australian government is asking for feedback via a web portal for AI language models. They want to know what's a good use case and what is potentially not a good use case. So I think in this point, I want to make sure that I'm talking about language models and not other uses of AI, because you know there's tons of uses for it, and there's tons of gray area on it. But ethically, I think, like I said, and just to go back to it, I think that it's important that we say that these are defined by our social consensus as a first point, and the things that we choose to agree with and the things that we choose to do and use, they create that reality. And if it becomes a social faux pas to say I use Chat GPT, it's going to have a different stigma than if we say, yeah, of course I use it. You know, it's a very different thing.
Yeah, these are again still open questions that we need to contend with. The next question is from Kerry. So Kerry says, might we see development of AI application providers like Apple, Google, Microsoft, etc., and other enterprises that play an advisory, arranger, facilitator role for AI users? The alternative is we all need to make sense of multiple AI application providers. So how is this landscape going to look like? And when there'll be again, I guess Kerry is alluding to convergences. So should we just deal with one, or will there be a future with many?
Yeah, I feel like right now it's a very competitive landscape, and watching even just the investment in this field is showing that that nobody's gonna roll over and say somebody else is gonna do it. I think that idea of owning that market, I mean, it is interesting, because I feel that if we are looking at that consolidation towards that, it starts to ask, those questions of what responsibility are we putting socially on that entity, but also, then it becomes, a monopoly issue as well, and so all these different things. But just to back up again, I think that if we're talking about, the way these things, kind of gel back together, one of the things that is great about generative AI is that you can just think of something random and throw it in there and start to get feedback and create a possibly useful piece of text on it. But there's a huge market as well, and I'm sure, Sandeep, I'm sure you've seen this, where there's a prompt market, and so you can buy prompts specifically for an outcome. I feel like that is something that's going to be scooped back into Microsoft tools, or back into like an app store type platform pretty quickly, because that idea of you want these particular prompts, or if you want this filter, this is the button to push, and this button costs you $1 to push, or something like that, because the monetization model with this is still very naive. But it's people obviously want to make money on it, and they need to make money on it. And the other side of that is I'm seeing tons of different companies and entities spring up to offer services of AI as a sales model, you know. So people are selling, not just selling access, but they're selling, you know, the product of it as well. So I think once Microsoft or, you know, Google starts to monetize on that path, it will be a very different story.
Okay, yeah, that'll be interesting to see for sure. I guess we have just time for one last question, Travis, and the question is more a little more personal in nature, in the sense that there is an interest from an anonymous attendee to understand what brought you to immersive technology from a contemporary art background. So what really led you to immersive technology? So what was the nudge? What was the push?
Oh, that's a good question from an anonymous person. It's I didn't know you could join this as an anonymous, but yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting. I was working a lot with you know, I worked bouncing back and forth between technology and contemporary art, which in my mind are very similar because it's the concepts are the same. I did some work with World of Warcraft. I talked about that. Some of my work was around, you know, looking at these virtual worlds and how society has evolved out of that within that virtual world. World of Warcraft was a MMORPG, very, very large role-playing game. And that was 2007, 2008. So talking about those ideas. And then my work over here, I came to work with the Biennale of Sydney, which is a fantastic organization that brings international artists to talk and show ideas here in Sydney. It happens every 2 years. It's one of the best things about Sydney. I love it. And I was continually being asked by artists, what is the idea of the internet that we can go into? Like, how do you go into the internet? Like, how do you physically go into the internet? And I mean, obviously there's no answer for that. Right. But the idea is, you know, the internet is all around us. We talk about it as a concept. We talk about our relationship with it, but, you know, kind of where is it? And and that thing that led to a lot of my work, both in the contemporary art side and a lot of the ideas that we explored, and working with these artists at the Biennale and working on those projects. And that really led to my work, starting with my company Lens. So yeah, I'm really, that's a great question, and that's something that's really close to me. That's something that's really important to kind of this journey, but also how we see these ideas and see these concepts. I know that we're out of time, but I just got to mention one of the great projects that I got the chance to work on was with Google and with the artist Callum Morton, who's based down in Melbourne. And we built a giant Google search page, like kind of a physical wall that was the size of a billboard. That was the Google search page. And it was on Cockatoo Island. And at the bottom of the search page, instead of, you know, it just being the bottom of the piece of wood, I mean, this was massive. I don't know, maybe 15 by 20 meters. It was huge. And there was a train that you could get on, and you could ride this train into the internet, which was, it was, yeah, it's a metaphor, but it's a concept that is, how do you go into the internet? And we're trying to answer that question, is how do you, you get on the train.
Cool. That's really cool. Thanks, Travis, for sharing that. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. It's time for us to wrap up now, and I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and for asking such engaging and thoughtful questions. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. The next live session Q&A will be held next Tuesday, 13th June, with facilitator Professor Lyria Bennett-Moses as part of Module 3, Leading Responsible Technology. I hope you continue to enjoy the course. Thank you and good evening.